The Lewis Hamilton Ferrari era is officially upon us as the 7-time world champion drives a Ferrari F1 car for the very first time. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks. Ian, going into this winter break, we all knew that the biggest week of the winter break before the cars officially hit the track in Bahrain for pre-season testing was going to be Lewis's first week with Ferrari at Maranello, and that the biggest day was going to be his first time driving a Ferrari F1 car. That week is this week. That test was this morning. I mean, it has started to settle in that Lewis Hamilton is a Ferrari driver.
I think it came home to roost, didn't it, when Lewis posted that first image of him on Tuesday evening in the red overalls. Yes, he'd had the introduction ceremony. He attended Fiorano on Monday. Numerous introductions to the myriad of people he now has to get to know at the factory, of course, in Maranello. So that was always going to be quite a busy day for Lewis. And I don't know how many people saw the image of Lewis and the way he was dressed, beautifully, elegantly dressed, fine suit he was wearing. And of course, that was great for a lot of people. Yeah, bit of realization setting in. We'd had to wait all this time, February 1 last year, when, of course, it was announced that Lewis would be joining Ferrari. And as I say, finally, he gets to be there on the Monday. But for many people, the sight of him in the red Ferrari overalls on Tuesday evening, and then especially today, Wednesday, of course, behind the wheel of a Ferrari for the first time. This is, for many fans, 2,000 there, would you believe? 2,000 people turned up at Fiorano on Wednesday. That, for them, was a huge day. One fan describing it as a historic day for Ferrari. We had our Dutch colleague, our Dutch Racing News 365 colleague, Aaron Dekkers, on the ground in Fiorano in the morning. He was speaking to a few fans there. Another fan, David, had driven all the way up from Milan, 2 hours drive, 4-hour round trip, just to go and watch Lewis in that Ferrari. Described it as a phenomenon now driving for us.
Yeah.
A phenomenal day, of course, for Ferrari fans, but yes, David describing it as a phenomenon driving for Ferrari now. So it just shows the importance of what it means to the Tifosi to have the 7-time F1 champion driving for them. So this week, quite a week for Ferrari and the Tifosi. And of course, for Lewis Hamilton, the start of what is a considerable new chapter in his Formula One career after all that time with Mercedes, of course.
And of course, it has been touted as the biggest driver move in the history of F1. And the interest behind that is kind of, I guess, the proof in the pudding. But it's a move that, as we discussed a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, is one with considerable pressure because, Lewis Hamilton at Ferrari, this could be the fairy tale ending to his F1 career if he were to get an 8th driver's title in red with Ferrari, following in the footsteps of so many F1 legends. And Ferrari themselves have taken a risk because Lewis is obviously not a cheap driver to buy. And, he's also now 40 years old. And to make this move happen, they had to say goodbye to Carlos Sainz.
I don't think age is a factor. We've seen what Carlos Sainz. We've seen what Fernando Alonso can do.
A different Spaniard,
of course, different Spaniard. We've seen what Fernando Alonso has been able to do over these past few years. His talent is quite clearly there. For Lewis, what's evident is that the motivation and desire are there. Johnny Herbert, former F1 driver, has noticed that Lewis appears to be clearly motivated over these first few days from what we've seen, the images and the footage, etc. That's undeniable. It's a question of, has Lewis still got it? And we refer to that on the basis of his comments from the back end of 2024 when he felt he'd lost a degree of speed. He was making numerous self-deprecating remarks about his own performance, about his lack of pace these days. I think this really now is going to reinvigorate Lewis.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to see a different side to Lewis going forward into this season. He is going to be rejuvenated, shall we say. I think that's a really good word to use because, yes, he'd spent all that period of time with Mercedes. Yes, of course, he'd won all those world titles, but we know what the last 3 years yielded, which was, bear in mind what Lewis has won, all those Grand Prix victories and all those titles, as I say, it yielded very little in terms of success, very little in terms of certainly Grand Prix victories. No titles, no additional titles, of course, not many podiums to go along with it. So for Lewis, this is, as I say, this new chapter in his Formula One career. As I say, the motivation is going to be there, the desire is going to be there, and now that you got to think that 8th title that he has been striving for since narrowly missing out in 2021, that could most definitely be within his grasp again in turning over this new leaf with Ferrari. So that's going to be the key over those first few Grand Prix. Motivation and desire, yes, will definitely be there. The hunger will be there. But will the speed, will the talent, will the skill still be there? We saw it during Grand Prix. That's for sure. Towards the back end of last season, Las Vegas, Abu Dhabi in particular, when Lewis had started that a little bit further back down the grid, but he managed to make his way through, scoring a podium in Las Vegas, and obviously managed to overtake George for 4th place in Abu Dhabi, of course, having made his way through up the field. It's a question of, is that one lap pace really going to be there? Does he still have that, which used to be one of the key elements in Lewis Hamilton's armory, his qualifying speed? Most definitely that was lacking last year against his now former Mercedes teammate, George Russell, who trounced him.
19.5, I believe it was, in the head-to-head qualifying.
Quite remarkable statistic. Without doubt, the worst qualifying statistic in Lewis Hamilton's storied Formula One career in terms of going up against the teammates that he's had the privilege to have worked with him, of course. So that is going to be crucial for Lewis and Ferrari. Is that one lap speed there still, or is it something that he's perhaps going to have to try and unlock again when we get to those new regulations in 2026?
What's really interesting, and of course, the big goal for Lewis and Ferrari is going to be to win races, hopefully maybe even championships. But reading the quotes from some of the Tifosi that obviously spoke to Racing News 365, and of course some of the Tifosi spoke to other outlets, is that the overwhelming feeling seems to be, reading the quotes, that they don't particularly care, at least at the moment, whether Lewis goes on to win races and titles. They just seem to be in awe of the fact that Ferrari have signed, this F1 legend, the most statistically most successful driver of all time, arguably Ferrari's biggest driver since Michael Schumacher. That does seem to be the feeling that actually there is a certain element of, you know what, we don't care what Lewis does. Just the fact he's here is something we're going to just enjoy.
I think you hit the nail on the head at the very start, that perhaps they don't care right at this moment.
Not yet, yeah.
Today, Wednesday, was all about just getting that first glimpse of Lewis out on track in a Ferrari. Because, as I say, it's a moment that had been building and building and building since February 1, since the announcement was made almost 1 year ago. There's been this heightened sense of anticipation over the course of that period of time, and in particular from the end of last season when Lewis bid farewell to Mercedes, and then, of course, when his Ferrari contract kicked in at the start of this year. So certainly over these past few weeks, since last season ended, that momentum has gathered, and that's why we have seen 2,000 people today at Fiorano to watch Lewis make that debut. But most definitely, once the season starts, then that's when they are obviously going to start caring, because for them, getting that constructor's title, getting that driver's title, so long now in the waiting for Ferrari fans, that will be the be-all and end-all for them. And if Lewis Hamilton could achieve it, then boy, what a denouement to Lewis Hamilton's Formula One career that would be. What a way to sign off. This for Lewis has been more than 20 years in the making. When he first mentioned to Fred Vasseur, when he was driving in Junior Formulae, and he was with Fred back then, one day I want to be a Ferrari driver. Well, here we go. 20 years later, Fred and Lewis back in tandem once again as a partnership. Will it yield that title, though? That is going to be the biggest question over the course of these next 2, maybe even 3 years if Lewis decides to carry on beyond 26, depending on how things are going for him.
It's definitely going to take some time to get used to seeing him in red, as well as all the other driver changes that have happened. The live timing is going to be an absolute nightmare to get on top of. And obviously, it looks like as well that Lewis has returned to the shade of yellow of his helmet, which he started his F1 career with, it seems to look like. But just a final talking point, looking ahead, obviously, to the 2025 season. Obviously, it's been kept no secret that these current regulation of cars don't suit Hamilton's driving style. That was made quite clear by Mercedes towards the end of 2024. On that note, what do you think, for Hamilton's first year at Ferrari this year, come the end of the year, what would be an acceptable year, do you think? Is it simply maybe a couple of wins, a handful of podiums? In your opinion, what does Hamilton need to do this year to ensure that he can regard it as a success?
Well, quite obviously, he will be setting out to win the driver's title.
Yeah.
It's the same with any driver when they know they've got a good car beneath them. That's the obvious goal. So Lewis will most definitely be going into this season, particularly when you consider how the Ferrari performed at the back end of last year, that it is a good car. It is a race-winning, podium-clinching car. It fell just short in terms of a title-winning car because Ferrari finished 14 points adrift of McLaren in the constructors' standings, as we know. So there's a lot for Ferrari on which to build. There is a lot for Lewis Hamilton to look forward to with positivity and optimism, that he knows that he has the basis of a decent car this year with which he can potentially score victories, with which he can definitely clinch podiums. He's most certainly going to be challenging at the sharp end of the grid because quite clearly, whatever Ferrari do to that car or are doing to that car over the course of this winter period right now, you have to believe it is building on all the goodness that they had within last year's car. Yes, as you say, Nick, it is the last year of these regulations because we have got new rules going into 2026. We know that the teams predominantly are going to be taking stock as to where they are over the first 5-6 Grand Prix, and then making a call of, do we stop here with this year's car and focus solely on 2026? Or potentially, if you're a team like Ferrari, McLaren maybe, Mercedes, Red Bull, almost certainly, if they've got something there that they can see that they can win a constructors or a driver's title with, then over the course of the remainder of the season, they are going to add little bits, not massive upgrade packages, that's for certain, because the resources in terms of finances, in terms of personnel, will not be there, given the focus that will be required and the resources that will be required for the 2026 car. But yes, there will be little tiny steps, hopefully just to add something to the car going forward if Ferrari is in the mix with regard to a constructor's title and potentially a driver's title. And of course, Charles Leclerc will most certainly want to be
forgotten.
driver's title fight. This is not just about Lewis Hamilton for Ferrari. One Ferrari fan this morning, speaking, of course, quite rightly, brought Charles Leclerc into the mix, and rightly saying as well that Charles Leclerc will want to get his name on that list of drivers' champions. As I say, right now, these early few days of what we're experiencing with Lewis Hamilton mania at Ferrari, yes, it is about Lewis Hamilton. But once the season gets under the way, absolutely, we cannot discount Charles Leclerc in that driver's title fight. It's an intriguing driver lineup at Ferrari this year, and there's going to be a lot of focus and attention on that, but rightly so.
Completely agree. And of course, for those who are watching this video, let us know in the comment section below what you think of the driver pairing of Hamilton and Leclerc and what you think Lewis will be able to achieve in 2025. On top of that, if you could please like this video and subscribe to the channel, that would be very, very kind of you. This has been a special episode of the Racing News 365 F1 update from myself and Ian. We'll probably see you in a few days, knowing the moment. See you later.
Take care as always, folks.